In this video, I'm going to show you how I made these smooth coil pots using a template. You don't always have to use a template when you're hand building, you can just do it by eye. And in fact, I made a video before about how I made this pot, which I also coil built, and I didn't use a template for that. And it was relatively easy to do. This is a fairly simple shape around the body of the pot, so it was quite easy to do without using a template. But once you start making something that's a bit larger or that has more curves and requires a lot of symmetry, then a template can be really handy, because when you're hand building, one thing that can happen is that one side might become a bit curvier than the other, and whilst you're working on it up close you might not notice that, but then when you finish the piece and you stand back, you can notice at the end that it's actually a bit asymmetrical. So a template's really helpful for that. So all of these I built using a template. The templates are really simple. I'll show you how I made them. This is the template shape that I used for this pot. This is the template that I used for this pot. And this is the template that I used for this pot. Now this one, I haven't glazed this one yet, but I just wanted to include it because it's a bit of a different shape. It doesn't have a lip on it and it's a bit bigger than the others, so I thought it was good to contrast it. And in this video what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to show you how I made this particular one, but it's the same technique for all of them. So if you like the video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and then you'll get a notification when I upload another video. Thanks for watching. So this is how I make the template. I usually start off with an A4 piece of paper because I don't normally make anything taller than that. Fold the paper in half right down the middle, and I know the diameter of the base that I want to use, so what I do is I mark half of the diameter of the base on one side of the middle line and half of the diameter of the base on the other side of the middle line, and then I do the same at the top, same measurements at the top. And then just draw a straight line between the 2 points at either end of the piece of paper. And this just acts as a guideline for when you're drawing the shape of the pot, so you know where the vertical is. Then fold the paper again the opposite way to how it was folded originally, with the lines on the outside. And there I'm marking about 2/3 of the way up the paper because I want the neck of the pot to be about that height. Then just draw the curve that you want the bottom half of your pot to have on the paper towards the neck. And then I'm just drawing in the shape of the neck there. And then marking in where the lip of the pot is going to go. And I'm just measuring the distance on one side of the paper and matching it up with the same distance on the other side of the paper, so I know I'm getting a level line across on the lip. And actually once I'd drawn it, I changed my mind about the exact shape that I wanted it to be. I took a bit of the shoulder off it. And that's the good thing about using a template. You can change it, you can have a look, and if you don't like it, you can just alter it. Then when you're happy with the shape, just cut out your drawing. And the reason I use a whole piece of paper is so that you can fold it out and you can look at what the pot's going to look like when it's being built. You've got the dimensions. So then you put it against a piece of quite firm cardboard like this, and use the paper as a stencil to draw the shape of the pot that you want. And of course cut it out. And then I snip off the very sharp bottom edge of the template so that that little sharp edge doesn't jab into the base of the pot as I'm using the template. And then what I do is I use some gaffer tape and just seal up the edge of the card, just to make it really smooth and to stop it from absorbing water from the clay. And I just to get the curve, a nice neat curve, I just use little sections of gaffer tape to go around the curved area. And there you have it, that is the template that I used. And then the first thing I do when I'm making a coil pot, hand building a coil pot, is I make a batch of coils. Now it's not a very complicated thing making a coil, but there is a bit of a knack to it. It can go a bit wrong, even though it's quite an easy thing to do, it can go a bit wrong, so you can end up with a sort of a flat oval coil that won't roll properly. You can end up with thin ends, fat sections and thin sections. I have made a video on how to make an even clay coil, and I'll put a link to that video in this one here, so I don't have to go through the whole thing again because it would make the video quite long. But you can see basically what I'm doing is I'm using both hands. If you stretch your fingers out wide, it kind of pulls the clay outwards. And then when it gets to a certain length, it gets a bit difficult to roll, so I cut it in half. What I'm doing there is I'm twisting it. By twisting it, that stops it from flattening out and you end up with a nice round coil rather than a flattened one. So yeah, I make a batch of coils and put them under a sheet of plastic so that they're there ready and waiting. And then I make the base of the pot by rolling out a slab of clay using a rolling pin with guides. There are roller guides on the end there. They will help you roll a slab with an even thickness. The slab then gets transferred onto a wooden bat, and I use, you can use whatever you like, I just use this particular lid quite a lot because I like the size of it. It's just a glaze lid. Using a needle tool you just cut round that, pull away the excess clay, and then there you have your base. It's about 1/2 inch thick, and I just tidy up the edges. And then start adding the coils. And the way that I do this, there's quite a few different ways of adding coils to clay, but what I do is I will position it on the clay and make sure that I'm happy with the length, and then I slice it off. Now you can see there's a tiny little hole in that piece of clay there in the coil, and it's good to keep an eye out for those and just make sure that they get that you get rid of those before you seal the coil up. So that's what I'm doing, I'm getting rid of that little air pocket there. And this is, you slip and score the end, so basically you scratch a rough surface into the end of the clay coil and then paint it with a bit of slip, and then press the two ends of the coil together and blend it in as securely as you can. Blending it in securely without making any particular section of the clay ring much narrower than another section, and then score into the ring on one side and then score around the base as well. And the scoring, basically it acts like a key, so that when you press the two pieces of clay together they key into one another. The slip, it acts like a kind of glue, and they join up really well. If you don't do that, if you just position the coil on, it probably won't bond very well. It might do if the clay is very moist, it might bond well, but just to be on the safe side, it's a good idea to do slip and score just to make sure that they really grab onto each other. And then once it's in place, I use a wooden tool to blend the inside of the clay coil onto the base, just to make sure that it's attached really securely. And then tidy up the surface with my finger. And then really sort of repeat the process, just smoothing, blending in the base of the pot into the coil. And then once it's properly attached, blended in and attached, then I use rubber kidney to smooth out the surface. It doesn't need to be 100% smooth at this point, but I do try and tidy it up as much as possible. And then this is when I start to use the template. You just, as you can see, I just position the template up against the base of the pot and then position the coil in line with the template, the silhouette of the template. And that just helps. At this point, what that's doing is it's just giving me an idea of where the coil needs to go. And as you can see, I'm cutting the coil on the diagonal, and it's a good point to be aware of, and that is that if you cut it on the diagonal, it makes the join a bit stronger. So then really just repeat the process of slipping and scoring the end of the coil together, and then scoring the surface of both the surfaces that are going to be pressed together, and adding a bit of slip, blending the inside of the pot with a wooden tool, and you know, when you're blending, it's a good idea to use your the hand that's not doing blending, just to support the edge so that it doesn't lose its shape. And again, blending the outside of the pot again. And then once I get to the second call, I generally start smoothing out the outside with a metal kidney, because although it doesn't need to be perfectly smooth at this point, the smoother it is, the easier it is later on to really tidy it up. So smooth it off first with a metal kidney and then with a rubber kidney, and then again using the template, just holding the template up against the pot and then positioning the coil in line with the silhouette of the pot. So once the pot ball has started to grow a little bit, then what I do is I actually use it to reshape the clay as I'm going. So I'll hold the template up against the pot, and then if I feel that it's either the pot's either getting a bit wide, if it's getting a bit wide, you can kind of rework the clay. You can as you can see, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just sort of pushing the clay in, so it's narrowing the pot in a little bit, bringing the walls in a little bit. And equally, if it's a little bit narrow, if the pot's a bit too narrow, you can press it out. You can use the template and press it out against the template to bring it into the right shape. And as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm turning the bat around, and I'm just holding the template up against the pot all the way around the circumference of the pot, just to make sure that it's taking the right shape on at all points around the pot. And when I feel like it's not quite wide enough, I'm bending the clay out and bending it out and pressing it outwards. And then at other points it might be a little bit leaning out a little bit too much, and then I can push it in. I can press the clay in a bit. And so rather than showing you every single coil that I'm adding to the pot, I just thought I'd jump ahead a little bit, because essentially the process is the same once you get onto a bit of a roll with it. You're just adding coils, checking the position of the coil in relation to the template, and then using the template to adjust the walls of the pot as you feel they need to be adjusted. And it might be worth mentioning, actually, if you've not made any coil pots before, that when you're bringing the walls of the pot out, when you're widening the pot outwards, what you're doing is you're adding the coils onto the outer edge of the coil beneath, and then when you're bringing the walls of the pot in, then you start adding the coils to the inside edge of the coil beneath. So you can see that as I have been tidying it up as I go along, as much as seems necessary. Really, I tidy it up so that I am able to just gauge whether it's the right shape. I do quite a bit of tidying and smoothing once the whole thing is completed, so I don't get too worried about that. But it's tidy enough so that so that I'm happy. I know I'm happy with the shape of the pot. And as you can see, I'm just going around checking different points of the pot and pressing the clay out where I feel like it needs to be pressed out a little. I've jumped forward a little bit here because, as I say, the process is basically the same, but I'm just adding the neck of the pot on here. So I blended in the neck of the pot here, and what I'm doing now is I'm just tidying up the shape. And then once I'm happy with the overall outline of the pot, then I start smoothing down the surface. With this particular one, at least anyway, I was wanting to get a relatively sort of precise, sharp edge around the rim of the pot, and I find a rubber rib is really good for that. So really I'm just tidying up the surface. Now I know that people have got various different ways of getting a level rim on their hand-built pots, but this is the method I use. I tend to use a small spirit level and mark the areas on the pot that are sitting a bit high, and then when the clay is leather hard, almost leather hard, not quite, I will just shave a bit of the high areas off with a scraping tool. And then once it's level, I use the ribs again just to smooth out the surface. And then again, once it's leather hard or getting there, I just do a last little bit of tidying up and cleaning up of the details, like the base. And then just a last bit of attention to the rim of the pot, just to make sure I'm completely happy with the detail. Sort of nibbling away with a little wooden tool, really. And then that is a damp chamois leather piece, a very small piece of chamois leather, which just takes away any of the marks from the wooden tool. So there it is, the finished pot. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!